How do you animate something 26 pixels tall? How can a character with barely enough room to blink exude emotion? From the tight restrictions on how many sprites could fill the screen to how much text could fit in each blue rectangular bubble, there were multiple challenges that Square was faced with when developing the first 6 Final Fantasies. The original Famicom battle sprites were 26 pixels in height, had only 4 different colors to compose their blocky likeness, and 6 different frames of animation. The Super Famicom characters were a few pixels smaller, but flaunted 11 different colors that drastically improved their individual wardrobe options and performed up to 40 unique frames of animation, conveying feelings of sadness, anger, doubt, surprise, and joy. In Final Fantasy I, characters would roam aimlessly around each town or stand and wait for you to engage them in conversation. Whenever additional movement was implied, they would vanish. In Final Fantasy II, characters began to walk along scripted paths, oftentimes when entering or exiting a room. This scene from 2, where Paul rescues your party from imprisonment, is one of the first clear examples of Square trying out comical sprite choreography. These scenarios would become much more elaborate, often involving the tiny actors jumping and throwing themselves around when the paltry 30 pixels used to create their faces couldn't communicate their excitement or frustration. It was this careful attention to expression that made the personalities in each Final Fantasy so charming, and the events so surprisingly engaging. In the first 5 games, there were separate sprites for the models in combat and on the overworld, a smaller one on the map and a larger, more detailed one in battle. But the 6th chapter in Final Fantasy used the higher resolution hero for both, adding about 10 different animations per character. Even minor movements like the wink of an eye or the wag of a finger drew layers of subtle inflections onto each scene. Best of all, the multiple NPCs you encountered grew up in stature as well. By the mid-90s, Square was ready to showcase the aptitude of their tiny thespians in one final 16-bit performance. Final Fantasy VI was released in Japan on April 2, 1994, and in America the following October. It showed up in the States as Final Fantasy III, and was the last title to be renumbered as it crossed shores. Yoshitaka Amano continued his work as the series' character designer, and Nobuo Uematsu wrote his most extensive score yet for the 6th installment. For the first time, Hironobu Sakaguchi did not direct, but produced the game and developed the concept. His former duties were split between series innovator Hiroyuki Ito and designer and writer Yoshinori Kitase. Kitase had worked with Squaresoft on Romancing Saga and the Final Fantasy Adventure for the Game Boy, but 6 was his directorial debut. He would go on to direct Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VII, and Final Fantasy VIII. 6 opened with an unnamed soldier who is still the only focal female protagonist to begin a Final Fantasy game. Her name was Terra, and that was about all she could remember. Hunted by yet another oppressive tyrannical government and possessing forbidden magical powers she could not comprehend, Terra sought refuge with the Returners, a renegade group secretly gathering their forces for an attack against Emperor Gestal. 1,000 years prior, a conflict called the War of the Magi almost destroyed the world, and society struggled to regain technology. The fight began when humans were tempted to harness the power of mystical beings called Espers, and it appeared the Empire was after the same goal, moving dangerously close to repeating another senseless and deadly mistake. Espers were the first names clearly bestowed upon summons, and a third ingenious system created by Hiroyuki Ito. Humans could only learn their power when the beasts expired into crystallized forms called magicite. Similar to the ability points from 5, winning battles in 6 awarded characters with magic points. When an Esper was assigned to one of your characters, these points would be added to the spells that Esper could teach you, and you would learn them at the percentage rate indicated. Some taught spells faster than others, and some taught just one exclusively. This meant that anyone could learn any spell, and use them at any time. The Empire's savage lust for the Esper's power, which forced the creatures into exile, combined with sacrificing their lives to assist you in your journey, gave summons a more important role in the central quest than ever before. The other element that contributed to the epic story was the astounding number of playable characters. 6 didn't let you assign jobs, just as 4 had removed the prior class system to concentrate on a series of elaborate plot lines. While 5 had 22 jobs, 6 eventually offered 14 characters you could swap out anytime to create your own party. Occasionally, the story filled in a few necessary spaces for certain scenes, but most of the time, all 4 roles were yours to cast. Your warriors could be customized even further by equipping up to 2 relics, trinkets that awarded various bonuses similar to the sub-abilities from 5. All this party customization made you that much more attached to whoever you chose each time the order opened up. At 2 points throughout the narrative, you were required to split up your available forces into 3 parties and command them all simultaneously against several meandering enemy groups. If one of them got past you to your end zone of the battlefield, the skirmish would be lost. In 2 certain dungeons, including the one that leads to the finale, you had to direct separate groups working back and forth to assist one another. And at one pivotal junction, the story split you into 3 teams with alternate destinations, and you got to choose your own adventure. The Returners' front lines were made up of Locke, a thief, Edgar, the young king of Figaro, Sabin, his twin brother, Sellers, a former imperial general, Setzer, a gambler and airship pilot, Cyan, a tortured warrior, Gao, a lost feral child, Strago, an elder mage knight, Realm, his rambunctious granddaughter, and Shadow, a ninja with a foggy past that's never completely revealed. Each character had its own signature talent and piece of the plot puzzle. Edgar used tools. Sabin performed Street Fighter-style button commands called blitzes. Sellers wielded a runic blade that absorbed magical attacks. Cyan counted upwards through different sword skills. Gao imitated monsters. Setzer pulled a lever on an attack-initiating slot machine, and so on. At least one segment of the game was devoted to revealing fragments from each of the characters' backstories, and some of them were more thought-provoking and heartbreaking than the events that made up the main mission. The only returners that were primed solely for battle, aside from cameos that would drop in and out of your party, were 3 optional recruits near the end of the game: the Moogle Mog, the Yeti Umaro, and the mysterious mimic Gogo, who also made a shrouded appearance in Final Fantasy V. Cid stayed out of the party in 6, merely helping you when he could. As a scientist in the Empire's Magitech facility, he had nothing to do with airships for the first time. All of these leading players were almost overshadowed by one of the gaudiest villains the series has ever feared. Kefka, Emperor Gestal's ambassador, was a nasty clown that demanded a great deal of attention. He was among the first faces to appear on the screen, and the first character to utter a spoken line of dialogue, even if it was just a trademark cackle. Kefka was not a supernatural being, or the collected sum of all evil, or a mind-warping god from another planet. He was a man, albeit a twisted soul, who sought supreme power above all else. He wasn't a puppet to a higher power, or a victim seeking revenge. He was just an awful human being, and a wonderful bad guy. But creating the characters wasn't enough. They acted and animated in ways the series had never attempted before. The fourth wall of the battle screen was obliterated, with interactive scenes often playing themselves out from the combat view. Instances where multiple characters were animated at once were now commonplace, instead of being reserved for towns or major plot moments. The best example of this, and the scene that stole the show, quite literally in 6, was an opera the player had to actively participate in by remembering their lines and blocking. This story within a story within a story shows how elegantly each event played out in 6, and why most of its moments are eternally unforgettable. With Cid working for the Empire, the high roller Setzer allowed you to borrow the only airship in the world. When that craft crashed and burned, he dug up another that belonged to a lost friend. You could be taxied by boat on occasion, but there were no canoes, snowmobiles, or submarines in 6, just the 2 flying machines. But your point of view while controlling them was drastically different. Instead of being stuck to one altitude and forced to travel in 4 directions, you had 360 degrees of movement, along with the ability to climb and dive through the air. A brand new mini-map in the lower right kept you from getting lost, which was easy to do with the extreme speeds of the new crafts. This new beveled angle was also applied to chocobo runs, which showed your character on bird back from a lowered perspective. The Second War of the Magi led both sides to the Sealed Gate, the border between their world and the land the Espers had originally escaped to. Coming in contact with their kind revealed that Terra was neither an Esper nor a human, but a product of both. Proof that the two races could coexist, she rallied the returners until they were forced to stop Kefka from disturbing 3 statues that created magic itself ages ago. But they were too late. Forced to flee the unnatural floating island, they boarded their airship just in time to see it torn in 2. The entire army was scattered, their fates unknown, and the planet was changed forever. Waking up in the shoes of Celes, on the shores of a deserted island, players had to explore this brand new planet of scorched earth, reassemble their ranks soldier by soldier, and reach a looming tower for the game's final confrontation. At SIGGRAPH in 1995, Locke, Terra, and Shadow made a command performance in a 3D minigame created by Square, using prototype Nintendo 64 workstations from Silicon Graphics. The technical demonstration was completely playable, with patterns made by a computer mouse initiating attack commands. It served to teach Square's artists how to render sprites in 3D, and show the eager public what they had in store for the first 3D Final Fantasy. FF6 was also ported to the PlayStation in 1999 and the Game Boy Advance in early 2007. Final Fantasy VI was an extraordinary way for the series to bow out of the second dimension. Its artfully crafted storyline and meaningful characters made the final chapter in the Nintendo saga feel as if all the other adventures had been building up to its creation. Its 20-minute ending is one of the longest on the platform, and as the last page in its book was turned, it was clear that 6 would be one tough fantasy to follow. From the way it capitalized on the full potential of the Super Nintendo to the acclaim it received, Final Fantasy VI's visual flair primed the series for the generation to follow, and it would never have to hide its true Roman numerals again. Join us next week when we explore the Final Fantasy game that needs no introduction. It was the first use of full-motion video, a spectacular shift into the third dimension, and one of the most intense role-playing obsessions of all time.